The longest government shutdown in U.S. history could be coming to an end. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. On Monday, the Senate passed the stopgap spending bill in efforts to end the shutdown. That piece of legislation is now headed to the House of Representatives for a final vote, but House Democrats say they are going to oppose it. Joining me now is CGTN's Poppy Inputting. Poppy, great to see you. So where do we stand now as far as ending this shutdown is concerned?
As you mentioned there, Anand, House representatives are meeting as we speak to put this to the vote. Of course, it did come about when it cleared on Monday night, the Senate, I should say. And so it's been a bruising couple of days in many ways as Democrats and Republicans continue to fight about this shutdown. It is day 43, the longest in history. And so for this bill that will potentially reopen the government, of course, we saw those 8 Democrats cross the aisle to join with their Republican counterparts. And there are a number of hurdles before the bill can proceed, which includes tonight's vote. Now, it has to be said that the Republicans have a razor-thin majority in the House of Representatives, so it is expected to pass, in which case it would be sent for President Donald Trump to sign, and we could potentially see the government reopening by the end of the week. But, of course, anything is possible. There are many coalitions within the House that are talking. There are fiscal conservatives, for example, who potentially could want to halt on this bill because they still feel that the spending is too high. It's anyone's guess how it will actually proceed. But of course, Americans have seen a lot of pain over the last 43 days with the government shutdown. We've seen the furlough and firing of thousands of federal workers. We've seen an interruption to SNAP, that's a nutritional food assistance program, and of course chaos at airports. So it's fair to say that there is anticipation that the government will be open soon if this bill is actually passed. And critical to note that one of the key points about this bill, though, which is causing a lot of controversy, is that it doesn't guarantee that there will be an extension of those healthcare subsidies, which is the very center of the argument that the Democrats have been talking about and why they didn't want to join with signing off on this budget. Anand.
And Poppy, there was one other big political development on Wednesday morning, well, potentially big political development. There were all kinds of breaking news alerts when we heard that Democrats in the United States Congress had released 20,000 pages of documents, mainly emails, relating to the congressional investigation into the Jeffrey Epstein saga. What can you tell us about this?
Right, yeah, as you mentioned, 20,000 documents. These are emails, yes, they're also images. And of course, this is really culminating in what has been a hugely controversial subject, which is the potentiality that US President Donald Trump was in some ways connected to the convicted pedophile who, of course, took his own life in prison. And currently, however, his co-conspirator, co-partner, Ghislaine Maxwell, currently in prison, who has been trying to tap the Trump administration for a possible commutation of her sentence, something that the White House didn't immediately say that it wouldn't do. And of course, there's also been that controversy that she has been moved to a lesser high security prison and is receiving favorable treatment. Now, in terms of these specific documents, the one detail that's really sparking the imagination of the media and the US public at large says that Donald Trump spent hours with one of the victims that is noted in this entire mess. Now, it's true to say that no emails were specifically to Donald Trump or from Donald Trump, but the mere reference of his name when he has persistently and consistently said he didn't know Ghislaine Maxwell, he didn't know Jeffrey Epstein, he mentions that, in fact, they had a breaking of their friendship and relationship. He's repeatedly tried to distance himself from any potential accusations and connection to that scandal. Just Wednesday, of course, we had Caroline Levitt, the press secretary, saying that these emails prove nothing. Now, as I mentioned, it's 20,000 documents. There's a lot to dig into, which you can be sure will be happening in the next couple of days. And it's really potentially going to get harder for the president to continue to deny that he had any substantive links to Jeffrey Epstein. So we'll have to see in the next few days and months just how that will unfold.
Okay, thanks, Poppy. That's Poppy and Pudding reporting there. Okay, to discuss this and more, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Miami, Jadan Horyn is a political analyst. From Virginia, we're joined by Rossi. He's an attorney at Carlton Fields in Washington, D.C., and former assistant United States attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia. From New Jersey, we're joined by Anthony Chan. He is a former chief economist at JPMorgan Chase, and right here on set with us, Joel Rubin is a former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for House Affairs. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Joel, let's start right here in the studio. Lots happening politically, but let's start with this government shutdown, which has been going on for a little over 6 weeks right now, but efforts are underway to end it with this stopgap bill. And that came after 7 Democrats and 1 independent, 7 Senate Democrats and 1 independent struck a deal with Republicans. But now they're being criticized for caving in. There's a lot of anger. Let's be charitable. There's a vigorous debate going on right now.
Yes.
What do you make of what happened?
Yeah, Anand, you're right. Look, the 8 Democrats are taking a lot of heat, and I did serve in the Senate as well as a staffer, and to me this looked like an orchestrated move by the leadership to say enough is enough. We've gotten through the elections. We don't have the numbers to win on this healthcare vote, so let's get the best that we can, which is a commitment to a vote. That vote will come in December about healthcare subsidies, so there will be a chance to continue to keep focus on that, embarrass Republicans for not supporting American health care, and get the government reopened and move forward. And I think that it was a hard pill to swallow. The activists are not happy, but it was the right call at the end of the day.
But talking about those divisions among the Democrats, there are now calls for the Democrat leader in the United States Senate, Chuck Schumer, to resign.
From everywhere but within his own caucus. So nobody who sits currently in the Senate who's a Democrat is asking for him to resign. In many ways, nobody wants that job. That's the hardest job right now in Washington outside of the presidency. It's thankless. And I think for Schumer, he's going to get beaten up from both sides. He's getting beaten up by the House leader, Hakeem Jeffries, as well. And it serves everyone's purpose because ultimately he can say he moved the government to open. He focused healthcare as the central issue that is going to be used by Democrats in the elections next year. You know, he's still standing as the Democratic leader in the Senate.
And very briefly, Joel, you say there is a commitment from Republicans to reopen this in December.
Well, there's a commitment to a vote.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they're going to vote for it.
Right.
And so what's going to happen is the pressure will be on now for moderate Republicans and others who will hear from their constituents over the next month that they don't like their health care costs spiking. They're going to have to tell those constituents that, no, they don't care. And so it's going to keep the heat on.
All right, let's go to Jadan Horyn. Jadan, good to have you with us. The key point of disagreement among the Democrats was that this funding that was being talked about did not include subsidies for health care for people who get their insurance under the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. And therefore, House Democrats said they would oppose the bill. Firstly, let me ask you, why are Republicans opposed to providing these subsidies?
Well, these subsidies were originally provided because of the pandemic. So, you know, they were sunset on purpose. They were designed to be temporary due to the economic dislocations related to the pandemic, which have obviously passed. So an extension of those subsidies for the reason for which they were initiated seems a bit bizarre to ask for. If Senate Democrats and Democrats in general had a different rationale for these policies other than skyrocketing costs, then I think that'd be something that maybe Republicans would be open to. Here's the truth of the matter, is that these subsidies artificially held down costs as inflation generated by both the Fed and the printing of money that has occurred over the last 5 years has led to an increase in costs that haven't been reflected in healthcare. And so all of a sudden there is sticker shock because the market is suddenly adjusting to what they would actually be.
Yeah.
Um, you know, conservative economists would argue that you should never do that to a populace, especially as a part of government policy. You should
Right.
always try to, implement it in some kind of incremental way. But that's why Republicans are opposed.
Okay, let's talk about the efforts right now, Jadan, to end the shutdown, which, as I said, has been going on for more than 6 weeks. Let's listen to what the Democrat House leader, Hakeem Jeffries, had to say about it. Let's watch.
We're not going to support a partisan Republican spending bill that continues to gut the health care of the American people. And we're going to continue the fight to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits. And if it doesn't happen this week, next week, this month, next month, then it's the fault of Donald Trump, House and Senate Republicans, who continue to make life more expensive for the American people.
So, Jadan, sharp words there from Hakeem Jeffries. How do you see this being resolved?
Yeah, partisan politics is so amusing. I will say that. This is a clean CR. It has been a clean CR. Removing the politics from it, and extending those subsidies can be a Democratic policy. And if they want to fight on it, they should fight on it. But trying to frame it in some other way that's less than truthful doesn't help the American people understand the arguments related to this policy. Healthcare costs are going to increase. They ought to increase because costs have increased across the board for everything else. Artificially holding them down will cost more money to the government. If that's what people want, then people need to understand that there will be higher taxes to pay those things. I think both sides need to be honest about that. And I think that will be something that will play out in the 2026 election. That's really where this is going. That vote that Joel referred to, that is coming up in December is a promise to vote. But this will be something that will end up being a 2026 campaign litmus test for both parties and for voters.
Gene Rossi, another crucial issue that's on the political agenda right now is the provision of subsidies for food for low-income families. That's a program known as SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. 41 million Americans are on this program. They depend on it. The courts have ruled that the Trump administration cannot block these subsidies, but it's been going back and forth. There's been rulings and then promises of appeals as well, and the White House is insisting that those subsidies will be cut. Where do you see that heading?
I think you're going to have a compromise between the White House and the Congress on how much will be cut, if anything. I think they're going to work it out. And the reason I say this, Republicans know that cutting SNAP and food benefits is just not a political hill that they want to climb. And at the end of the day, going into 2026, when they have Congress up for re-election, they'll realize that they'll probably have to cave on whether they cut food assistance. It's not something that Republicans should latch onto. And probably in January, February, you're going to see some kind of compromise that will satisfy, hopefully, all sides.
Anthony Chan, let's look at the economic impact of this shutdown. The Congressional Budget Office has projected that about $11 billion in economic activity has been lost because of the shutdown. Federal workers are owed $16 billion, and we just see over the past few days how airlines have been cutting flights. There's a reduction in services to many parts of the United States. How much of an impact is this going to have long-term on the U.S. economy?
I think it's going to have some impact, but not a dramatic impact. We know that the third quarter growth, according to the Atlanta Fed nowcast model, is about 4%. But as you go into the fourth quarter, where the shutdown really had a significant impact, I would not be surprised if you get a number that's 0.5% or even less for real GDP growth on an annualized basis. So that's the impact of the shutdown, to see growth going from 4% to less than 1%. But then what happens when you open it up, a lot of that economic activity comes back. Not all of it, because if you were going to eat in a restaurant as a federal worker and now you stay home, you're not going to go back and say, I'm going to have 42 different meals because the government was shut for 42 or 43 days, or even multiple meals. So a lot of that activity is lost forever. Airlines, similar. if you were going to a party for a relative, you were going to fly there, and now the party is gone, you're not going to fly. So that economic activity is gone, but not all of it is gone. The federal workers, yes, as you correctly point out, and on did not get paid, but eventually those checks come back. Now, the federal contractors, they didn't get paid, and that money doesn't come back. So again, that's economic loss. So there will be some economic loss, no doubt.
You know, Anthony, we often talk about the economy as this sort of nebulous, monolithic entity, the federal economy, but there are also these micro-economies that exist all over the country. And one of them we talked about the last time, and that is the labor situation here in a place like Washington, D.C., where we've seen so many workers lose their jobs. And that number, as you pointed out, is likely to increase.
Yes, we're going to see a lot of jobs being lost, and that puts pressure on the unemployment rate. But something else is happening. We don't operate in a vacuum. We've seen close to almost 2 million people being deported outside the United States. So that reduces the supply of labor. So the unemployment rate doesn't go up as much when you reduce the number of workers that are out there. You had over 500,000 deportations, and then another almost 1.6 million self-deportations. And these things have not been expensive, pretty expensive, because some of the estimates suggest that on average, when you take into account all the costs that the government incurs, is somewhere around 35,000 on average. I wrote a Substack article on this topic, and it's been a very expensive proposition. Now, some people will say it was well worth it, and other people say it wasn't. I leave it to your viewers to decide, but it's not something that happens seamlessly. It's not something that will have no economic impact. All these things have economic impact, short run and long run. So longer term, it's going to mean that a lot of type of sectors like the construction sector, the hotel sector, they're not going to have a lot of workers. Construction shortages of workers, all these things are going to be something that we suffer longer term. And then, of course, the restriction of H-1B visas, all those things are going to have longer range economic implications.
Joel, one would imagine that if you increase people's healthcare costs, or you cut the food help that they're getting, that would be a vote loser.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Jadan just pointed out to us that those subsidies for Obamacare were actually temporary. But do the Democrats have a plan on how to use that to their advantage? I mean, we haven't seen much in the way of them mobilizing public support. I mean, they don't have control of the House or the Congress, or the White House for that matter. But
well, you know, Anna, this is not theoretical. We just had elections a week ago. And we had statewide elections in multiple states, and in all 13 races, Democrats won overwhelmingly. And the core issue the Democrats ran on, be it New Jersey or Virginia, be it Georgia and Pennsylvania, was affordability. And so this issue fits right into that. Nobody wants to see their healthcare premiums skyrocket 4 times. That's not affordable. And for President Trump, this is also a signal of his failure to fix the economy. What this basically demonstrates is that when he won in 2024, he said, I'm going to lower inflation. I'm going to make your life essentially more affordable. And it's not. And so we saw Democrats win overwhelmingly last week. And I think that's why the message will continue to be beaten on this healthcare issue in particular in the next months.
Jadan, Horyn, if we look back at the outcome of those elections that Joel's talking about, do you think with the midterm elections coming up next year that Republicans will start perhaps pivoting more towards economic concerns, towards affordability, towards the cost of healthcare, towards SNAP benefits as well, you know, as the election cycle picks up speed?
If they want to preserve their majority, they're going to have to. I think you already see some, the more, I would say, politically astute, yet, you know, someone would argue that they're not, like the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world, already pivoting to talk about affordability and talk about costs and slam President Trump, especially with his, you know, recent interview that he had, that he referenced a 50-year mortgage, not knowing the difference between a 40-year commercial mortgage and a 30-year mortgage, offering that it was only 10 years more. You know, comments like that were not taken well by the Republican base. They were not taken well by MAGA supporters, by supporters of the president that think that he is disconnected, arguing for more H-1B visas, arguing for more university students to bail out universities' finances. Those things, those are not being taken well. So, Republicans need to pivot. But I will say this. The Republican Party is led by President Donald Trump. And if President Donald Trump does not pivot on these issues, then the Republican Party will have a hard time trying to counter message that and react in an effective way to Democrats. The 2026 midterms already lean towards Democrats. And we know what the agenda is going to be for Democrats when they come in. And so Republicans, if they know what's good for them, will start messaging and counter messaging. But that remains to be seen. The Republican Party is pretty tied to the cultural issues right now, and a pivot to economic ones would mean they would have to give up on things like the loss leader that they had on trans rights and bathroom rights and women's rights in Virginia. The base doesn't want to give that up, and that's the problem.
Okay, I want to talk about that. Gene Rossi, I want to turn briefly to that issue. It's one of the major issues that came up before the Supreme Court. Actually, it didn't come up before the Supreme Court, the issue of constitutional rights for same-sex couples, because they said they don't want to take a hearing on that. They rejected a hearing, so the decisions by the lower courts will stand. How significant is that?
Well, in terms of politics, well, you had the Dobbs decision where they took away the right to choose and they threw it to the states. I think the Supreme Court is probably going to stay away from the same-sex marriage because it's now ingrained and people have gotten married the last 10 years, the last several years, and it's hard to reverse that. The Dobbs decision was prospective. People that wanted to get an abortion, it was prospective. But to go back and reverse people who got married following the Supreme Court precedent, I don't think the Supreme Court wants to reverse that.
Anthony Chen, one of the other big issues that has come up before the U.S. Supreme Court are the Trump tariffs. Oral arguments have already started. I mean, this goes to the heart of the separation of powers, what the White House can do and what Congress can do and what they can't do. Initial reports after those first round of oral arguments were that the justices were ruling that Trump does not have the right to impose these kinds of tariffs, that is the job of the United States Congress. So what would be the implications of a ruling by the Supreme Court against tariffs, against Trump imposing tariffs?
Well, I think it's something that is a strong possibility. I wrote another Substack article on this topic of these tariffs. And right now, the administration says that it would be the end of the world if somehow these tariffs under IEEPA are reversed. But the reality is that they have not raised all that much money on those IEEPA tariffs. And the question is, if you have to give them back, it's not the end of the world. We're talking about a small amount of money. Now, I know that the president has said that we've collected trillions of dollars in tariffs, but the reality is that the Treasury Department says that we've collected less than $200 billion, and they're estimating that we may collect $300 billion. And then, of course, the president says he wants to give a $2,000 check to every man, woman, and child. If they do that, guess what? That means that it will cost about $300 billion. But the bottom line, to answer your question directly, Anand, if the Supreme Court were to rule against this, there's still a huge toolkit that the president has access to. There's like 4 or 5 different sections of possibilities that the president could go to in order to impose tariffs. The catch is that they have severe restrictions. Some are temporary. Some of them have to require a study. They don't give the flexibility. But the bottom line is that the Congress has the power to tax tariffs or taxes, and that's not clear that the Congress has basically delegated that power to the president. So I would say right now the odds are that about 60% chance that the Supreme Court will say you can't do it, but the Trump administration has vowed to come back under different sections to do it, but it will be a little bit more cumbersome and less flexible for the president to do that.
Right. Gene Rossi, I want to talk about the implications of this for the separation of powers, what Congress does, what the White House does. The group that opposes these tariffs in court says it's not the job of the White House to raise revenue. That job is for the United States Congress. Do they have a point? I mean, does this blur the line between what the White House can do and what Congress can do?
What we have to understand is this. A tariff is a tax. And under the Constitution, Congress has the ability and authority and the mandate to raise taxes. So when you give that authority to the President of the United States, directly or indirectly, you're chiseling away the Congress's power under Article 1 of the Constitution to do what they're mandated to do. If they don't find that these tariffs are unconstitutional, then the unitary power of President Trump has just been expanded and exploded in his favor. So I think the Supreme Court, at the end of the day, is going to find that these tariffs are unconstitutional and preserve the Congress's power to raise taxes, also known as tariffs.
Okay. Joel, very quickly, I've got a little bit of time left. I want to get to this Epstein case. So we had these emails that were released on Wednesday morning, tells us that President Trump knew a lot more about the Epstein case than he's letting on. The White House says nothing to prove here.
Yeah, they're going to keep on pushing that message until they get laughed out of the room. The release today from the House Oversight Democrats was followed by a release of documents from the Republicans. They're going to have a vote likely in early December on the House floor. They're going to be publicly reading the emails that include President Trump's name throughout. And I just don't think it's tenable for him to continue to deny he had any involvement.
All right, let me get Jadan's view on this before we close. Jadan, could these developments gain traction? I mean, is it okay for the president to say, or the president's spokesperson to say, this proves nothing?
Well, I think if there was a there, it would have been revealed in the 2024 election and probably would have been determined. So the president will continue to deny whatever emails were there is, hearsay from a dead man. And that's what Republicans are pretty much going to say.
Do you think it could become a political issue with the upcoming midterm elections?
Well, it is a political issue for the MAGA base, and it is definitely going to be a political issue for Democrats. So it is a political issue. The president and establishment Republicans can sweep it aside, but if you listen to conservative podcasters and if you listen to the media, it already is an issue and will continue to be one.
Okay, and that is where we need to leave it. Thank you to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.